So we started off this week talking about Chapter 3, the American Free Enterprise. We've talked about what roles the government should play in a free market economy. Section 1, we talked about regulating business. Section 2, we talked about promoting growth. Today, we'll talk about Section 3, promoting public goods. And tomorrow, we'll talk about Section 4, providing a safety net. First, let's start off by addressing what a public good is. A public good is a shared good or service for which it would be inefficient or impractical to make a consumer pay individually and to exclude those who did not pay. So some examples to think about are roads, bridges, public parks, schools. Maybe your parents are police, firefighters, or work for the armed forces. Those are all examples of public goods. So we're going to define the public sector versus the private sector. The public sector is the part of the economy that involves the transactions of the government. The private sector is the part of the economy that involves transactions of individuals and businesses. So when you go buy a new pair of shoes, you're dealing with the private sector. In the case of most public goods, it is simply not practical for a private business to provide the service, charge those who benefit, and exclude non-payers from using the source. For example, maintaining street signs and traffic lights is one economic role of the government. You wouldn't pay a business individually for your neighborhood to go maintain a street sign. The government takes care of that through your taxes. Public goods can be used by any number of consumers without reducing the benefits to any single consumer. Public goods are financed by the public sector, and firefighters are also an example of a public good. Let's talk about the costs and benefits. So when you're deciding whether a good should be funded by the public sector or the private sector, you want to weigh two criteria. Does the benefit to each individual cost less than the cost the individual would have to pay if it were funded privately? And are the total benefits to society greater than the total cost? The government pays for public goods through taxes, like I said. Thus, the financial burden on each individual is significantly less than if a few people decided to fund a project privately. So if a group in your neighborhood wanted to build a bridge over the intercoastal, it wouldn't make sense for them to fund it privately and then limit access to only the people that paid for it. It'd be way too expensive. So the government interferes and funds the bridge publicly through everyone's taxes, and then everyone is allowed to use the bridge. So let's talk about a market failure. A market failure is a situation in which the free market, operating on its own, does not distribute resources efficiently. So I want you to turn to page 64 and 65 in your textbook and take a moment to read through that graphic. The graphic shows the example that I was just talking about of a bridge being built, and it shows if it was funded privately, how it would be a market failure, therefore it's funded publicly, and it's a public good. So the free rider problem. Have any of you ever heard of someone use the term freeloader? For example, someone that always comes to lunch and doesn't bring his lunch but just eats pieces of other people's lunch. Well, you can kind of relate that to the free rider problem. One issue associated with public goods is known as the free rider problem. Free riders are people who are not willing to pay for a particular good or service but would benefit from it if it were offered as a public good. The free rider problem suggests what would happen if the government stopped providing public goods. People would refuse to pay and many services would be eliminated. Can you guys think of an example? What about fireworks? What if fireworks were funded privately and you didn't pay for them, but you were still going to go out in your backyard in a lawn chair and watch them? That's an example of the free rider problem.